prophet has her closest followers isolated in a remote valley outside Gardner, Montana.
Light bearers of the world, children of the sun, welcome to the inner retreat.
It's a Montana-based spiritual group of some 3,000 people.
As a cult, accused of brainwashing people.
Her word was law. She was the voice of God, and no one questioned her.
We come in the moment and the hour of the pinnacle.
The issue is not whether or not they're nice people, but where are they being led by a person like Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who claims to not only speak for Jesus, but Buddha too.
If you watch my channel a lot, you hear me talk about cults from time to time. Whether it's cult-like tactics being deployed by a religious organization or a campus group, I do talk about it here on my channel. And when we talk about cults, it can be really easy for us to fall into cliches. It's all too easy to imagine a brainwashed congregation of devoted followers with long white robes, having group chants in the desert, or even a charismatic leader waving a Bible and predicting the very near end of the world. But the truth is so much more subtle than that. Real life doesn't provide you with a warning label when you enter the doors of a high-control religious group or a cult setting, and real life is so much more complicated. Cults don't look odd and abusive to the people who exist inside of them. They look and feel and sound and smell like home to those people. To the members in a cult, this environment looks like safety, like answers, like a way forward when the world feels confusing and hostile. And if we're honest with ourselves, most of us could have been drawn into types of situations like these too. That's one of the reasons that I want to tell the story with compassion, and that I remind you guys every time that we talk about cults that they're really insidious. And while it might seem obvious on the outside for us here watching this video, and once, the news articles are published about all of the things going on, it's not so obvious to members when the cult is being formed and when they first get hooked in. Today we're talking about the Church Universal and Triumphant, led by Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Yes, Prophet.
Cult or church? Elizabeth Clare Prophet has the last word.
I don't consider myself a cult because I am not dominating my numbers. I lead my people to the heart of the I am that I am, who appeared to Moses, the individualized presence of God that we commune with. People who believe one way in this country do not give the freedom to others to believe in another way. We have worked very hard on racial bigotry in this country, but we have not worked hard on religious persecution.
This cult is one that you likely haven't heard of before, and it's not just a quirky chapter of American religious history. It's not just an oddball group of doomsday preppers in Montana. It's a story of human longing for certainty, for protection, and a future that feels guaranteed. And at its heart, this story is also a story of betrayal. It's the betrayal of countless members' trust, their dreams, their longings, and their time. It's the betrayal of people who gave up everything, their children, their money, their futures, their time, only to find themselves left in the wreckage of failed prophecies and a leader who demanded too much and gave back too little.
It doesn't matter to me what path you're on, what teaching you follow, as long as it's not self-destructive or destructive to anyone else. Do what you will, because this is the age of freedom.
Now, if you've been following my channel for a while, you know that I approach these types of topics with an ex-evangelical, I should say, perspective. I grew up deep inside the evangelical faith, where for me, fear often felt stronger than the love that's supposed to be within the religion, and where apocalypse was never just a distant idea, it was something that we were told could happen at any single moment. And that background makes it impossible for me and for so many of my viewers to just laugh off a group like the Church Universal and Triumphant, because I see the same patterns and the same anxieties and the same hooks that latch onto vulnerable people's hearts. So let me set the scene for you guys. It's the late 1970s. The Cold War is at its height, and nuclear war is not just an abstract idea. It's something that Americans are going to bed thinking about, worrying about every single night, and something that kids even prepare for in schools. Movies, the headlines, political speeches, everything is filtered through this impending sense of catastrophe. Now imagine that you're living through that anxiety and someone comes along and says to you, I have a direct line to higher powers. Yes, higher powers plural. And those higher powers have warned me, only me. The higher beings have given me instructions. And if you listen to me, you can survive and you can save yourself and you can save your family. This was the promise that Elizabeth Clare Prophet made to her followers, and her followers ultimately believed her. The Church Universal and Triumphant, which we're going to be shortening to cut for this video, it is often shortened to cut when you read about it online. Cut was one of the largest and most absurd new religious forces of the late 20th century. At its largest, it attracted tens of thousands of followers. They even built vast underground shelters in Montana stocked with food and weapons and prepared for the nuclear end of the world. But it didn't begin as a bunker cult. Cut's roots go back way earlier to mystical movements in the 1930s. It goes back to the rise of charismatic teachers who claimed to speak for the ascended masters, and back to a man named Mark Prophet who passed his leadership on to his wife later on, Elizabeth. When we talk about the Church Universal and Triumphant, it's hard not to treat Elizabeth Clare Prophet as their key figurehead and the real force behind the movement. And to be fair to Elizabeth, she was the face that most people remember, and she is the face that I'm going to keep showing you guys in all of this footage throughout of this video. She's in all of the videos in the media coverage. She's the small blonde woman standing at the podium, delivering to her followers what she calls dictations from heavenly beings.
Light bearers of the world, children of the sun, welcome to the inner retreat.
Here in the mountains of Montana resides another self-proclaimed prophet. Her name is Elizabeth Clare Prophet, head of the Church Universal and Triumphant.
We welcome you to the heart, and we sing the song of gratitude. Hear, O universe, I am grateful.
But she didn't create this world out of nowhere. Cut didn't start with her, and Elizabeth's rise was only possible because of a movement that came before her, one that laid the groundwork for everything that Cut would become. To understand Elizabeth, we have to start in the 1930s, and in the 1930s there was the Great Depression, and regular people were desperate. Just in time to meet this rising desperation and this sense of hopelessness, Guy and Edna Ballard stepped onto the scene, who claimed that they weren't just religious teachers. They were actually messengers of a hidden spiritual hierarchy they called the Ascended Masters. The Ballards called their movement the I Am activity. They taught that certain spiritual beings like saints or even figures like Jesus or Buddha or other prophets had transcended the cycle of death and then rebirth. They had ascended to higher realms of existence, and from that higher plane, they were still speaking to us each day. They were still active in guiding humanity, and all that you had to do was tune into their frequency with an open mind and a willing heart. And of course, the Ballards claimed that they could tap into that. They said that they had the ability to receive dictations or messages directly from these masters, which became the foundation of their teachings. For people in the 1930s, this message was an instant hit. It was equal parts mystical and practical, and their message acknowledged that, yeah, sure, the world might be a dark place, but that there are higher beings that are watching over you every day. And if you learn to say the right prayers in the right mindset and the right decrees, then you can align with them and you can change your own destiny forever. It sounds pretty good, right? They sure thought so. The I Am movement grew very quickly, and the members kept joining. At its peak, it actually had hundreds of thousands of followers, and they gathered in ballrooms, they chanted affirmations together, and they built entire communities around these dictations, which again, it just means messages. When Guy Ballard died in 1939, the Ballards' mission began to collapse. Edna had spent years fighting legal battles with the government, who had accused her of mail fraud for selling spiritual promises through the mail system. The I Am movement never fully went away, but it did fracture pretty significantly, which is to say that I Am might be gone, but the ideas didn't die or go away when Edna and Guy did. And that's where Mark Prophet comes in. Remember Elizabeth? Remember Cut, the Church Universal and Triumphant? Mark Prophet was born in 1918 in Wisconsin and was raised in a Catholic family. In his early adulthood, like many young adults, Mark went looking for something that was different and more purposeful than the church that he grew up in. By the 1950s, Mark Prophet had become a devoted follower of the I Am teachings by the Ballards. He wasn't just kind of into it. He allegedly even believed that he too was a messenger. He was called to be a messenger for the Ascended Masters. In 1958, Mark Prophet founded his own organization called the Summit Lighthouse. The name was meant to help people envision a beacon of light, a strobe of light on the mountaintop that guides seekers through the storms of life, which was supposed to be a really powerful metaphor. Mark positioned himself as the new prophet of the Masters. Mark's dictations carried the exact same vibe as the message that the Ballards had. The messages were partially mystical and partially apocalyptic warning, and Mark and his followers really believed that the Ascended Masters were preparing humanity for spiritual transformation, and that there would be devastating dangers and consequences if humans didn't take heed to the warnings that they were being given. The Summit Lighthouse was pretty small at first, but it did keep pulling in a steady crowd and kept increasing over time. And Mark Prophet had charisma, honestly. He had the kind of confidence that made people want to lean into the message and to follow him. But it wasn't until Mark Prophet met a young woman named Elizabeth Clare Wolfe that his legacy really began to form. Elizabeth was born in 1939 and was the daughter of a German father and an American mother. Even as a teenager, she was searching spiritually, and she was drawn to Christian Science, to Catholicism, and really to any sort of religious system that offered her an answer to the question of life and death and spirituality, pain and suffering. And by the early 1960s, she was living in Boston and working as a secretary. This was about the time when Elizabeth came across Summit Lighthouse and the teachings that went along with it. And naturally, that's also where she met Mark Prophet, and something just clicked between them right away. Yeah, Mark might have been over twice her age, but he recognized in her what he called a spiritual destiny, which does sound important. Elizabeth became not only Mark's student, but his second wife, which is a huge conflict of interest if I've ever heard of one. But together, Mark and Elizabeth became the power couple of the Summit Lighthouse. He was the worn and wise prophet, and she was the young and passionate visionary. Gradually, Elizabeth began to share the stage with her husband Mark, and she began delivering her own dictations, which proved to all that she too could channel the Ascended Masters. When Mark Prophet died suddenly of a stroke in 1973, it was a really tough loss for everyone in the group, and Elizabeth was only in her mid-30s at the time. She was a young widow. The organization could have collapsed right there, but Elizabeth did not want to see that happen. So she stepped forward to fill the role of leadership. She declared herself the messenger of the Masters and rightful inheritor of Mark's mission. And her followers accepted her wholeheartedly. This is the part for me where the story changes from small group of spiritual people who had a charismatic figurehead but kept it pretty relaxed to a high control religious group setting. Because Elizabeth wasn't just continuing Mark's work, she was actually expanding it pretty drastically. Her followers started calling her Guru Ma, and Guru Ma was determined to take Summit Lighthouse out of its niche and into the public world.
We stand here and we contemplate the flame of our beloved Gautama, and we feel the flow of Shambhala.
Former members claim that Elizabeth, or Guru Ma as she is known to followers, receives messages from such higher authorities like Jesus and Buddha. The messages are said to
And we are
invoke
being
fear among her
filled
flock.
with the light.
They say the followers are kept in a suggestible state.
I am light. I live in light.
The chanting itself is a form of mind control because you don't think about anything but the words you're chanting. Therefore, everything that was in your mind before is completely canceled out and you become blank.
She rebranded everything and even renamed it from Summit Lighthouse. And by the late 1970s, she had established what would become the Church Universal and Triumphant instead of Summit Lighthouse.
Newspaperman Sullivan says it's not the church's religious practice alone that bothers him. It's what he and others in Montana believe may be hidden behind their faith.
They are not to be trusted. They are a cult. Any cult is dangerous. They are a means to an end organization.
CUT wasn't just a church, and it wasn't just a New Age spirituality fad. It was a whole universe with its own rules, characters, battles, and solutions. It told people where they came from, why there was pain throughout life, and how people could transform pain in their lives into true meaning. In CUT's teaching, the Ascended Masters were enlightened beings. Enlightened beings were souls who had lived on Earth as regular people, but had then gone beyond the cycle of death and rebirth. They had transcended past it, and now they lived in a higher spiritual plane. They weren't detached, though. They were actively guiding humanity and intervening in human history and sending messages to the chosen ones. The Masters had names that sounded pretty familiar and will probably sound familiar to you. Jesus is one of them, as is Buddha, Saint Germain, and even Mother Mary.
A messenger is one who does bring the message of the angels, of the Ascended Masters, and of God to a people who have forgotten their source.
The Ascended Masters, spirits like Jesus, Buddha, Merlin the Magician, and someone called Rayolite, bring prophet visions of destruction. The Soviet Union, she believes, is planning a first nuclear strike. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are riding across the land.
And as you know, these four horsemen bring problems in the economy. They bring war, they bring death, they bring famine, they bring plague.
But they'd also had names that you would only know if you were inside the movement, like El Moria, Kuthumi, Jual Kul, and Lanello, who conveniently was believed to be the ascended form of Elizabeth's late husband, Mark Prophet. CUT's theology blended the familiar with the not-so-familiar. For example, Christians could recognize Jesus and Mary. Spiritual New Agers or other religions could resonate with ideas like reincarnation and karma borrowed from Hinduism or Buddhism, and mystics could relate to the idea of hidden masters behind the curtain of history. And even to me, a lot of the teachings do feel randomized, but they're all presented by them with absolute authority. And authority mattered to this group because in CUT, you didn't just study the masters, you received their dictations.
You are having a little trouble visualizing yourself living inside of God. Is that something you can easily visualize or not? This is why Hinduism has the most marvelous statues of all the various deities. You can take a picture or a statue of Lord Maitreya, or of Shiva, or of Vishnu, or of Manjushri, any one of those great spiritual novas whose birth has created the ripples that never cease. Christian mystics believe that all men by nature are like God, and that within everyone there is a spark of the divine. They also believed in the indwelling Christ. This Christ, they said, can be formed or born within each of us. The second element common to the mystics is their pursuit of direct intercourse with God through contemplation and prayer. Today I will continue to take up the path that has led the Christian mystics to that very goal. I take it up so that you can follow that path very specifically in their footsteps, and that you can also know that in the dispensation of Aquarius, there are some of the practices of the saints that have been superseded by the teachings of Saint Germain.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet stood at the podium, and her voice would change. She would close her eyes and she would start speaking very robotically, and she would say that these were actually the masters speaking directly physically through her. And their messages were urgent and sometimes pretty raw and sometimes hell-bringing, but always carrying the weight of a divine command for the congregation. If you've ever been in a Pentecostal church where people speak in tongues, or if you've ever heard a pastor say, "Thus saith the Lord," then you'll recognize the kind of dynamic here. It bypasses argument. It makes debate impossible, and you're not disagreeing with Elizabeth, you're disagreeing with the cosmic beings who claim to hold the fate of the world in their hands. And alongside the masters came the practice of decreeing. This was a kind of spoken prayer, somewhere between chanting and affirmations. Followers would gather in the halls, sometimes hundreds of them at once, and they would begin to recite long and rhythmic decrees. These weren't soft meditations, they were loud, almost militaristic at times, with cadences that are designed to build momentum and build that energy.
May the Lord bless and keep you. May He let His light shine upon you and be gracious to you and give you His peace and give you His peace. May the Lord bless and keep you. May He let His light shine upon you.
The purpose was, well, two things really. It was to purify your own karma and to influence world events. Decreeing was said to call down violet flame energy, which is a kind of spiritual fire that consumes negative energy and reshapes your reality and transforms sin. So imagine being in a room with hundreds of voices chanting together for hours.
But take the violet flame that is the gift of Saint Germain, the consuming fire of God that is our baptism into the new age, and take Saint Germain himself personally. Because this temple that we have, this body here below, needs to be filled with a violet flame, because here are the records at the levels below the chakra of the heart of all past lives and embodiments. These need to be transmuted, and that's what the violet flame is. It's a flame of mercy, forgiveness, transmutation, alchemy, freedom, justice, all of those, and science itself.
It was intoxicating for the members, and that's a part that's hard for outsiders to really understand, because from the outside, decreeing might sound bizarre and cultish, because it is, but on the inside, it felt powerful, and it gave people who felt powerless in their ordinary lives a sense of broader agency in their own life. In this setting, you were a warrior of light, fighting side by side with Jesus and Saint Germain and the entire heavenly host. And layered onto this was dose after dose after dose of apocalypticism. Elizabeth taught that the masters were trying to warn them all of a looming catastrophe. Nuclear war was pretty much the most immediate and damning threat, but it wasn't the only one that they talked about. They also talked about economic collapse, environmental issues, and people just becoming worse people, a moral decline. And these were all going to be signs of the end times, which were near, and CUT members lived with a constant sense of urgency.
Church's current leader, Elizabeth Clare Prophet. The organization itself sometimes seems less a church than a cult, but it has several thousand members, and as Nightline correspondent Farah Sawyer reports, their convictions, and their activities are a little difficult to ignore.
We feel that there are some very difficult times that will be coming upon the earth, either through cataclysm or possible nuclear war, and we believe in being prepared.
If you grew up evangelical, this might sound hauntingly familiar to you. The rapture could come any day, and Jesus could split the sky apart at any moment, and the world is always on the brink of collapse, and your job is to stay ready, stay vigilant, stay pure, and stay faithful. And CUT added its own unique spin on that. It wasn't about being saved by grace, it was about burning off your karma through relentless spiritual work, and it wasn't just your personal soul that was was at stake here. It was the fate of the entire world. One of the most seductive part of Cut's theology is the idea of reincarnation paired with chosenness, this theory of chosenness. You weren't just randomly alive in the 70s or 80s, you had been born at this exact time into this exact group because you had a special mission. Maybe you were the reincarnation of a medieval saint. Maybe you had been part of great battles, and now that you're here in this lifetime, you are here to finish that work. And that sense of destiny is pretty powerful. It takes ordinary suffering, your loneliness or just feeling out of control, and it frames it as part of a grand narrative, an overarching plan for your life.
We're people just like everyone else who are looking for a better way of life, a more profound way of life. We're not violent. We love people. We love life. We love experiencing different kinds of things, and we're diverse. I mean, you've got the whole gamut, the whole cross-section of the world right here.
That you are actually chosen, that there's no way you could be lost. And of course, there was a darker side to all of this too, because if you're chosen, then disobedience also carries an unfathomable weight to it. If you failed, if you doubt yourself, if you choose to leave the group, then you're not just disappointing Elizabeth, you are betraying the Holy Masters. You're letting down the entire planet. And that's the trap of groups like this. They give you the world, but only on their terms. And the moment you step out of line, that love is going to turn into condemnation. Hutt also taught strict moral codes. There was a huge encouragement of vegetarianism, and you weren't allowed to drink, do drugs, or have casual sex. Members were also expected to give a lot of their income to the church, and sometimes they would even be told to sell their homes or their businesses to support the mission that Elizabeth had. Children were also raised in an atmosphere that was filled with discipline and a lot of spiritual vigilance. Elizabeth was the center of it all. She was the messenger, the voice of the masters. She was the one who could see behind the veil. The more she spoke, the more her authority grew, and by the late 1970s, her followers weren't just listening to her, they were reorganizing their entire lives around her words, which leads us to the next stage of the story, because when you mix mystical teachings and constant apocalyptic warnings and a charismatic leader claiming direct access to higher beings, there's only one direction that the story can go, towards urgency and survivalism, and towards a community that is convinced that the end of the world isn't just possible, it's inevitable, and it's coming soon. The 1970s were honestly the perfect time for new religious movements to sprout up, and America was in the middle of what sociologists at the time were calling the cult boom. The counterculture of the 60s left a lot of people searching for additional meaning in their lives, and the mainstream churches often felt like they were missing the point for a lot of people. On one side, you had the Jesus movement sweeping young evangelicals into charismatic revivals, and on the other, you had gurus from India and Buddhist teachers and New Age mystics finding eager audiences with spiritual seekers, and Elizabeth had positioned herself right in the middle of that spectrum. She wasn't rejecting Christianity, she talked about Jesus all the time, but she did also reframe Jesus as one ascended master among many others, which is not something that most Christians would believe.
Jesus tells Thomas, the kingdom is inside of you. And Jesus told me many years ago, when you see that word kingdom in scripture, it means consciousness. The consciousness of God is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will be known.
And she didn't reject patriotism either. In fact, one of her strongest appeals was that her movement wasn't trying to overthrow America, it was trying to save it. That blend of Christianity, religion, New Age, it was all magnetic for people. By the end of the late 1970s, Elizabeth had begun drawing in followers from all over the country and even internationally. Unlike some movements that did attract young and unfortunate people. Cut often drew middle-class educated adults, and these were people who were teachers, engineers, or just worked professional jobs. They're people who might not have been at Woodstock, but who felt restless inside their suburban routines, and they came because Elizabeth offered more than her sermons. She spoke with an air of conviction, but also with a lot of refinement, and on stage she looked polished.
Paradise Valley, Montana. God's country, they call it here. Not the kind of place you'd expect to find a New Age range war.
Jesus has told me that the kingdom of God is the consciousness of God.
And this is not the kind of person you'd expect to be leading the battle. Elizabeth Clare Prophet, head of the Church Universal and Triumphant, whose teachings are a grab-bag mix of Western and Eastern philosophy. She believes she is the reincarnated spirit of Queen Guinevere and Marie Antoinette. To her church members, she is the mother of the universe, the very messenger of God.
Under Elizabeth's leadership, Summit Lighthouse expanded its publishing wing. It pumped out books and pamphlets and recordings of dictations, and they put on retreats and conferences and major events, and they drew thousands of people to their events to hear Elizabeth speak. She launched radio programs, they built out mailing lists, and they even did interviews with mainstream media. And we can't underestimate the power of her speaking style either. In dictations, she could sound otherworldly, and her voice does drop into these really strange toned and weird cadence. I don't know. I'll give you guys some video evidence of it so you can see for yourself, but it does feel like something else I've never quite seen before.
Lord Michael, and legions of blue, come seal me now, keep me faithful and true.
Ordinary talks, she's personable and funny and kind and sweet, and she had the ability to shift from these really big kind of like cosmic proclamations to really practical advice in the same moment, and that combination was able to build trust with her followers. And it's trust enough that they started reorganizing their lives around Elizabeth's wants. Communities began to form around Summit Lighthouse centers in the cities across the US and abroad, and families moved closer to the headquarters. Children were enrolled in Summit schools, and careers were even abandoned in some cases.
In 1980, the Church Universal and Triumphant settled on 33,000 acres in Paradise Valley, Montana. But in the past several years, it's hardly been paradise. The group has been accused of using mind control on their members, stockpiling weapons, and training their flock to defend their land in case of nuclear war. On their site sits 15 huge bomb shelters. One of them holds 700 people.
An estimated 3,000 church members gave up their old lives to follow Prophet's visions to Paradise Valley, chanting for protection and preparing for nuclear holocaust, dotting the landscape with scores of fortified bomb shelters, room for every man, woman, and child in the church.
Members gave a lot of their time and so much money to the group and countless hours. Cut became not just a church, but a self-sustaining community. It had its own publishing arm, educational programs, and a global network.
These things close and go in against the two openings in there, and there's no way of opening it up from outside.
Fred Morcell gave up a full-time acting career to come here and build this underground shelter for himself and 6 others. When the messenger of God announced this past March and April were the most dangerous times, Morcell prayed and waited.
We were ready to go down any minute. Any minute.
Disaster was averted, members believe, in part because they prayed it away. But church members also take other security measures. Ed Francis, Prophet's 4th husband and the church's business manager, together with her former bodyguard, were recently convicted of illegally buying $100,000 worth of assault weapons and ammunition to be used, Francis said, after a nuclear war, against looters, or when the Soviets invade.
Even pacifism. And I believe that if you are attacked in your home and somebody's going to rape your wife and kill you and your children, that you better defend yourself or you're going to have the karma for allowing all those lives to be taken.
Elizabeth did a really good job keeping the story alive throughout this time. Every conference, she had new dictations to share with people filled with urgent warnings, and she always had new assignments from the masters. And followers weren't just attendees, they were soldiers in this battle. They were building momentum towards what Elizabeth warned people time and time again was the ultimate showdown between good and evil, the end times. And by the late 1970s, she made a decisive move. Like we talked about, she renamed the Summit Lighthouse to The Cut. The new name, the Church Universal and Triumphant, reflected their ambition and how they felt about the group. It wasn't just going to be a niche spiritual society. They wanted it to be universal in its scope and triumphant in its mission. And Elizabeth wasn't just a teacher. She was a messenger. She was almost a prophetess. She was their figurehead. And Cut was now firmly on the map of America's new religious landscape. And as the group grew, so did scrutiny of it. Journalists started to cover the Cut and have concerns.
All of this sounds too familiar. It's because so much is reminiscent of David Koresh and his branch Davidians. The mind control, the bunker mentality should they be attacked. But it's a comparison that church officials view as totally incorrect.
Their view of the apocalypse was some sort of a fiery, flaming end. First of all, we don't believe in the end of the world, and our view of the apocalypse in the book of Revelation has nothing to do with actual physical events outplayed in the world, as most people perceive it to be.
Sensitive to these comparisons, Elizabeth Clare Prophet went on radio during the 51-day standoff in Waco. During the broadcast, she made an appeal to David Koresh to surrender peacefully.
There are a lot of people depending upon you, Dave, and I'm asking you personally, in the name of our Lord, to come out and give yourself into the hands of the authorities today and let your people breathe the air of freedom.
It's a Montana-based spiritual group of some 3,000 people that has aroused the anger of its neighbors and the concern of half a dozen federal agencies.
But from the inside, the 1970s felt like a golden age. Conferences were full, dictations were constant, and the energy was through the roof. Followers felt like they were a part of something world-changing, but in the background, a much darker thread was growing. Because alongside the decrees in the community and all of the positive aspects that might be going on, Elizabeth's messages also started to escalate and cause a lot of fear. The Cold War was raging, and nuclear war was a big threat in Americans' minds. And for Cut, those anxieties weren't just political, they were something spiritual that they were responsible to handle. Elizabeth wanted to warn more urgently than ever before that this was imminent. This was going to be happening soon.
You actually said more than just that March and April were going to be dangerous months. You predicted that on the 23rd of April there was going to be, what, some nuclear attack by the Soviet Union?
No, absolutely not. I've never predicted a nuclear attack for April 23rd or for any other day. I'm simply saying there's a probability of nuclear war and confrontation between the superpowers anytime in the next 12 years, and that April 23rd, 1990 marks the final 12 years of the ride of the four horsemen that were seen by John the Beloved, recorded in Revelation. That began in 82. That's all I have said about that date.
What is it about these 12 years in particular that's going to be so different about what's preceded it?
The cycles of returning karma, which is what they bring and have been bringing, intensify, and therefore personal and planetary challenges intensify. And I think indeed we are facing the greatest challenges in our nation's history and in the history of these 2,000 years, whether it be the war on drugs, education, AIDS, cancer, the economy, and what is going to happen to nuclear weapons when they get in the hand of madmen, what's going to happen when many more nations have them. I think we're living in a nuclear age, and karma can become physical more quickly than any other time in this 2,000-year period.
And this reshaped the entire movement, because when people think there's a deadline, they start to get prepared. And in Cut's case, they didn't just pray for the end times. They actually started to build bunkers. They stockpiled weapons. They sold homes and moved to Montana to wait out the apocalypse there. But before we get there, it is worth pausing because this is the middle period. This season of growth shows us something, in my opinion, that's really crucial about how cults function. They don't start with the bunkers. They don't start with disaster. They start with inspiration and community and changed lives and a sense of belonging and a clear mission statement. And that's why they're so powerful, and that's also why they're so hard to leave. And Cut was no different than that. If you were to step into a Cut community in the 80s, you wouldn't start thinking right away, this seems like a cult. You would just see families and kids playing around. You would see people weeding their gardens and wearing nice clothing and maybe wearing crystal jewelry, but you'd see them laughing and smiling and playing music and being active. And then if you stayed long enough, you might also notice the rhythm and the structure and the pressure, because life inside Cut was not casual. It was intense. Every hour of the day was infused with purpose, with ritual, with preparation for both spiritual growth and physical survival. At the heart of Cut life were the decrees. They were spoken out loud, chanted really, really quickly in a very rapid cadence, and sometimes they would do this for hours and hours and hours. And these mantras were believed to release spiritual power in the congregants and to summon protection from the masters, which are these like spiritual guiding forces, which would then burn away the karma. And the most famous was the Violet Flame Decree. It's a chant that invokes a mystical fire that can purify your soul and transform negative energy from Saint Germain. Imagine sitting in a room with 12, 24, 36, dozens, sometimes hundreds of people, all chanting in the same hypnotic rhythm. Their words might sound like nonsense if you're an outsider, but to those on the inside, it was so powerful, and it was world-changing, life-changing. It was central to their beliefs. Decreeing wasn't just optional, and members were expected to devote hours each day, sometimes 12 hours or more, to the chanting. Parents brought their children into decree sessions, and babies would sleep, and kids would learn the words if they were old enough to stay awake before they could even fully read. The result for all of the congregants, for the children, for everyone, is exhaustion, but it also does give them a type of euphoria with the lack of sleep. People will describe after hours of chanting feeling light, almost high, and like they'd touched the divine, or like they were on a buzz, and they felt like they were being healed. And beyond decreeing, life really revolved around work. Members who lived near headquarters often worked for Cut-owned businesses or even volunteered their labor for the church itself. And money was also flowing upwards this whole time, no big surprise. People were expected to tithe. Large donations were very encouraged, and some families were even going to give away their entire savings, their homes, their inheritances, because what was the money to them if the world was going to end in a few years anyway? Housing was provided in communal and modest for them, and families sometimes crammed into small trailers or even cabins, and there wasn't a lot of privacy there. Life was communal and shared, and for some people this felt like heaven on earth, like they had found their spiritual family and their purpose, and for others, especially the children, it felt claustrophobic. The people who left said that there was little room for individuality and little space to question or step outside of the system. I want to take a second here to focus on the experiences of children in Cut, because the experience of children in Cut deserves special attention. While adults choose to follow Elizabeth, kids were simply born into it and dragged into it. From a young age, children are taught that they are special. They had been chosen to incarnate into Cut families to serve the Master's mission. But along with that sense of chosenness came the enormous pressure that I talked about before. These children are expected to memorize decrees, to attend long services, and to live in constant readiness for the end of the world. Many people remember falling asleep to their parents chanting late at night, or describing dreams of the end of the world and bombs going off and nuclear nuclear wars, which was really reinforced by the constant messaging about it, or drills that they had to run, or the fact that they had underground bunkers. Childhoods were entirely overshadowed by fear. And education, too, was filtered through cut programming. While some children attended public schools or outside educational systems, many of them were homeschooled within the community, learning not just reading and math, but also Elizabeth's worldview, her warnings about karma, conspiracies, or the coming end times. For many survivors, the result was traumatic and having anxiety, nightmares. These kids grow up anxious and mistrustful of the outside world and unprepared for life outside of cut. And fear was everywhere in cut. This even goes outside of the children.
Is that you lost a lawsuit, a man claimed that he was assaulted, he was
those claims were unfounded. He never proved that he was assaulted.
But he won his case. He won $1.5 million and the California Supreme Court upheld that claim.
In that
and there are a
climate,
large number of other people who claim that they've been brainwashed, who feel that they've lost 6 or 7 or whatever, how many years of their life. Well, there are a large number of people who think otherwise.
Well,
and there are a number of books and experts who also believe that people can be brainwashed. And in North Korea, during the Korean War, pilots were shot down, and they were denounced the United States. And there have been studies that pointed out that there have been brainwashing.
In this country.
And folks, I'm afraid we're going to have to put a stop to it. I'm grateful to both of you.
There was the fear of nuclear war, of getting bombed, fear of falling out of alignment with the masters, fear that you might be cut off from your broader religious community, and Elizabeth really did frequently reinforce that fear through her dictations. In her messages, the masters would warn the people of looming catastrophe, or they would even reprimand the community for the things that they might be doing wrong. Members often left sessions with Elizabeth feeling really upset or afraid, or feeling like they were unworthy, they hadn't been doing enough. This fear is something that keeps people compliant and trying harder and builds the cycle of dependency. The only relief from anxiety came through more decreeing, more devotion, more obedience, and more affirmation from Elizabeth. But it would be incorrect to say that it was 100% negative, because survivors do recall that it was a beautiful campus, is maybe the wrong word, compound, to live in Montana. It was great to live in tight-knit communities and have so many friends nearby. It was nice to share meals and have festivals and gatherings and to feel like you were part of something that was larger than life. And this is one of the reasons why cults are so powerful. They're not only about control, they also provide belonging, and that belonging, especially in a world that feels very alienating to a lot of people, can be intoxicating. It can be addicting.
People who come to be with you, why do they have to stay with you? In other words, you don't, as most religions have, people who come to church, let's say, once a week, or come to synagogue once or twice a week. Your people have to come and live and stay with you. Why is that necessary?
Well, that's not true at all, and neither is there any commercial activity connected with our church. I'm at the international headquarters of Church Universal and Triumphant on the Royal Teton Ranch, and we have a staff of 750 people, including their families. North of here, there is private property called Glastonbury, where people own private land and pursue their private lives and do as they please. The shelters you showed were in Glastonbury. They're privately owned. Incidentally, that war tower that Pete Story is concerned about is a communications tower and a lookout post. It's only 12 feet tall and will be lower when it is backfilled, and it's only 8 feet in diameter on the inside.
What are you looking out for?
What am I looking out for?
Well, what is that? Whoever sits in the tower, what are they looking out for?
Well, they tell me that if they're going to be in a shelter underground, they need to be able to see what's going on outside and above ground, and so it's radiation proof. And so they have installed it. They've done that on their own, and I've had nothing to do with the building or the selling of shelters in Glastonbury. No one has to come and live with me to be a part of my church. Far from that.
That belonging isn't real, and it comes with a huge, huge loss. The sacrifices demanded by cut are pretty steep. Like I've said, the time is gone, the money is going to be gone, your career is gone, and relationships with outsiders are also going to be gone. The families who moved their entire lives to Montana often left behind family members who did not understand why they would abandon everything for for a doomsday prophecy, and some members even got divorces when their partners didn't want to join the cult. Others cut contact with their parents or their siblings and labeled them as being spiritually unsafe and that they couldn't move forward themselves if they had these negative influences. It's something that kept the isolation really strong. Over time, the pressure on people, the work, the constant decreeing wore people down. Sleep deprivation and financial stress and emotional exhaustion and even children just not getting to have a normal life did require members who left to go through years and years of therapy just to learn that they weren't constantly on the verge of annihilation. The psychological impacts of being in a cult or believing this type of rhetoric it cannot be overstated. It is so harmful. The most haunting detail about life inside CUT is this for me, that for the people inside of it, it was just ordinary life and it was just their home. They were normal to them. The things that they did were expected, and that ordinariness is what makes cult life really difficult to explain to outsiders and makes it really difficult to leave behind, because leaving isn't just abandoning a leader, it's abandoning your entire world and your social circle, your new family. It's abandoning your entire world, and as we'll see in the upcoming parts of this video, their world was about to be shaken to its core, because Elizabeth wasn't only preparing people spiritually, she was preparing them physically for the nuclear war that she was insisting was just around the corner. I haven't talked too much about it at this point, but she started telling all of her followers that their life would soon be in a full-blown apocalypse and that they needed to move out to the Montana wilderness to survive.
Elizabeth Clare Prophet, leader of Church Universal and Triumphant, has predicted an imminent nuclear strike. The doomsday date is set for October 2nd, 1989.
Leaders often revert to becoming more specific in setting dates because it's a way of galvanizing commitment.
But news of the predicted apocalypse causes alarm among nearby residents.
They were labeled as a cult, accused of brainwashing people. Animosities kept growing as more and more church people came here.
Which is why when people think about the Church Universal and Triumphant today, they don't usually think about the Violet Flame with Saint Germain or the Ascended Masters or even the 12-hour-long decree sessions that everyone was forced to partake in. They think about bunkers. They think about the thousands of people that are in Montana or were in Montana living underground in these fallout shelters. They think about people stockpiling food. They think about people stockpiling weapons, fuel, and waiting for the end of the world. And that really isn't an exaggeration, you guys. That is exactly what Elizabeth wanted. So again, we're in the late 1970s, and these urges that the end times are near, they started to become more specific and urgent. So in 1981, CUT announced that they were going to purchase a massive property in Montana's Paradise Valley, just north of Yellowstone National Park.
This town is all about fly fishing, rafting, and tourism, and the church was seen as a threat to that because, you know, we were moving 750 people into this area. So, needless to say, relations between the church and the townspeople were kind of frosty.
And if locals knew exactly what was going on at nearby Royal Teton Ranch, they'd be even more concerned.
And the land, which is more than 12,000 acres, was titled the Royal Teton Ranch.
Elizabeth Prophet has her closest followers isolated in a remote valley outside Gardner, Montana.
Her word was law. She was the voice of God, and no one questioned her.
We come in the moment and the hour of the pinnacle.
This was a lot more to them symbolically than just a new headquarters. It was a retreat, it was a sanctuary, and it was their fortress. And Elizabeth declared that it would be a place of refuge for everyone in the church when the bombs fell. And so hundreds of their families sold their homes, packed up, quit their jobs, and moved their asses to Montana to prepare for the end of the world.
We mounted this furious effort over the course of about 18 months to build these huge shelters.
The Church Universal and Triumphant poured millions of dollars into constructing these vast fallout bunkers beneath the Montana earth.
As this rarely broadcast footage shows, believers started to construct an underground city to ride out the nuclear winter.
These weren't just small family shelters that would be in somebody's backyard, like a storage cellar type of thing. They were massive. They were concrete-lined complexes designed to hold hundreds of people, and they were stocked with food, with fuel, they had clothing, and there was even medical supplies down there.
There were 6 living pods, each one housing 126 people. They had kitchens, they had showers, they had infirmaries, they had laundry facilities, they had everything that you would need. The largest shelter, it was twin arches that were each 300 feet long, 40 feet wide, 20 feet high. You could drive a semi-truck inside that thing.
Members were assigned spaces in these shelters. Families would even work on hauling in different canned goods, flour, milk, whatever they might need during nuclear fallout. And survivors even bring up memories of there being drills where they were told to go get supplies and then rush underground and practice for the day where this would actually be real and they would have to go underground for an extended period of time, which obviously, especially for the children, is terrifying.
Cosmic law is cosmic law, and when the karma has to teach people a lesson, then it has to descend.
I believe that there are peak dates when nuclear war could happen anytime in this 12-year period that began on April 23rd.
For adults, it's exhausting and financially draining in a very real way. But for Elizabeth, this was proof of their loyalty and their dedication to the cause. And every dollar, every hour of labor was poured into the shelters, and it just demonstrated the group's central vision.
The church members deny any illegal activity on their ranch and say it's nothing more than a close-knit community, complete with general store and restaurant.
Well, I think it's a prototype city. We have a mail department. We have our own post office. We have firemen. We have a good, solid medical staff. We run an ambulance. And we have our schools. So if you take a look at that, you have the makings of a good, small community where we live with lots of people who have the same values and the same lifestyle.
Still, cult expert Rick Ross calls this isolationism. He says ex-members talk about it, and he says it's typical of cults.
These Montana years also marked a pretty big shift in the tone that CUT had. Elizabeth actually authorized the stockpiling, allegedly, of different firearms, and they had purchased rifles, shotguns, semi-automatic weapons, anything you can think of, they had it, and they believed that was because they would need to defend themselves from people who would want to come loot them when the end times happened. They would have to protect themselves from others.
Well, there's been a sense of betrayal and lack of trust.
Newspaper publisher John Sullivan has kept the church under a microscope and warns danger may be waiting.
We have a religious-based organization with private property, with, in this case, large bomb shelters, underground shelters stocked with provisions and supplies for up to 7 years. We have the church leadership that's been involved in illegal weapons purchases and very convincing evidence in my mind that there is a lot larger arsenal of weapons than was ever involved in even the illegal, the prosecution of the illegal activities.
Throughout the 1980s, her predictions grew more specific, and she talked about more impending strikes, and she started attaching dates to the prophecy. In 1981, she said that the Soviets were preparing to attack them, and then in 1984, she said the exact same thing again. And each time, her followers got super stressed out, tense, stockpiled possessions, and each time, very obviously to us sitting here in 2025, the dates passed and nothing happened. Rather than losing her team, she decided to double down, and they believed that the decrees were what had averted the disaster, and that it wasn't that her prophecy wasn't true, they had just saved the day. And this is one of the mechanisms that keeps failed prophecies alive. When the world doesn't end, the leader can always say, well, it's because you obeyed, you did so good. In the late 1980s, Elizabeth did make her most famous prediction ever. She declared that in the spring of 1990, nuclear war was certain, that the Soviets would launch, America would be destroyed, and the only people that would survive are the people that were in the cut shelters. The warnings were broadcast to the entire community, and members were told to prepare, and they did. They stepped up to the challenge because this was something that they'd been preparing for their whole lives, technically, kind of. Imagine being a child during that time, being told that the world was going to get exploded, everyone you knew was going to die, and that they're all excited about it. Some survivors do describe being marched into bunkers for drills that lasted for days during this time, and others even remember watching their parents sob and be terrified and watching them desperately praying to God as the date would approach. And the psychological toll was enormous. But in March 1990, nothing happened. March came and went, and the bombs didn't explode, and everyone was okay. The sky stayed calm. And for many people inside of the Church Universal and Triumphant, this was the breaking point. They had given up everything. They had given up their homes, their money, their family connections, just to sit underground and watch everything else keep going on happily and just fine. And some people did quietly leave in this aftermath, pretty upset about it, but other people did stay, and they clung to Elizabeth's explanation that the decrees were what had averted the disaster once again. But the cracks in the movement definitely started widening at this point because people could only hang on for so long. The prophecy failure of 1990 didn't just damage morale inside of the compound, it actually attracted international attention. And news outlets started going down to Montana, and they decided to start reporting on the weird New Age cult that had underground bunkers and stockpiles of weapons, and Cut became a symbol of doomsday fanaticism.
I don't think that there's any reason to conclude that Church Universal is moving in a direction of being mainstream. In fact, what they are doing is moving in the direction of becoming more and more isolated, witnessed by the communities around them, their neighbors, and ex-members who are coming out and telling some pretty bad stories about what life was like in Church Universal and Triumphant. The issue is not whether or not they're nice people, but where are they being led by a person like Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who claims to not only speak for Jesus, but Buddha too. And she is an absolute authoritarian leader that exercises total control over her followers.
They got lumped in a lot of times with groups like Jonestown or Waco, which they really didn't like, and they tried to get away from.
The church does not own weapons, doesn't stockpile weapons. I can tell you, I've known Mrs. Prophet for personally and deeply for 20 years. She would never allow this church to have a stockpile of weapons to become an armed camp or anything like that.
Government agencies also started to notice because of the concerns about illegal weapon stockpiling, which did ultimately lead to more investigations and lawsuits, which caused a lot of financial strain and brought a lot of public suspicion, and members kind of stopped joining as quickly.
Many residents claim the church's frenetic rush to prepare for the end of civilization is also hurting the environment. The main bomb shelter, with room for 750 people and an entranceway big enough for an 18-wheel tractor trailer, is being built in what was once prime habitat for grizzly bears, elk, and pronghorn antelope. When 3 of the shelter's fuel storage tanks burst last month, spilling out 32,000 gallons of diesel oil and gasoline, residents complained bitterly.
Unfortunately, Montana has some very lax zoning and land use laws. You could build a Tower of Babel up there and it would be all right with the state.
One of the reasons the argument over the future of this valley is so bitter is because it lies right next to Yellowstone National Park. Any development here could have a direct impact on one of America's most precious wilderness areas. They say the most extraordinary hot springs in the world could be harmed if the church follows through on plans to tap its own springs.
Because it's an intricate plumbing system down there. And all over the world, they've shown that if you mess around with that plumbing system, then you're going to turn these geysers on.
The church denies all the allegations, saying they are the result of media bias, or plots to force them off their land, or religious persecution.
Where was Elizabeth during all of this? Well, she started to decline. Her health started to get worse, and her predictions started to become really incoherent. And for many members, the illusion of certainty was really shattered. The apocalypse hadn't come, and now they knew that Elizabeth had Alzheimer's. People rationalized things in their own way, but for most people, the spell broke, and they realized that they had been deceived. Once that thought took root in the community, it definitely unfortunately spread like wildfire, and families who had devoted their entire lives to Cut started quietly leaving, and others left just in exhaustion. The failed prophecy wasn't just spiritually damaging, it was financially catastrophic. The bunkers had cost the group millions of dollars, and maintaining the Royal Teton Ranch required constant income.
Many followers donate their savings and work for free.
We probably spent in the neighborhood of $25 million on the shelter complex. That figure doesn't include 2 years of unpaid labor for around 200 people, men and women.
Lawsuits and government scrutiny just kept piling on. In '91, federal agents raided Cut properties over concerns about weapons stockpiling, and the group was fined so heavily. When she announced that she had Alzheimer's, some followers did cling to her, and some followers felt that this was proof that the mantle had been lifted, that the Masters had withdrawn their blessing from Elizabeth. Her illness left a huge vacancy with no one else to fill it. Who could lead Cut after her? Different factions emerged, and some leaders tried to modernize things, some tried to downplay the more extreme apocalyptic teachings, and reposition Cut as a gentler New Age community, but others doubled down and they tried to cling to the old prophecies and the bunker mentality, which resulted in a lot of splintering, fragmentation. Without Elizabeth's commanding presence, Cut lost its group mentality. It lost its cohesion. Some members drifted into other New Age movements, and others left religion altogether. A smaller core did stay true and loyal to the Masters and to Elizabeth's legacy, but the days of mass rallies have been long gone. And now Cut has really just become a cautionary tale. Media reports tried to highlight their failed doomsday prophecy and its underground bunkers and its stockpile of weapons, and documentaries even painted Elizabeth as a classic cult leader driven by ego and paranoia. Neighbors in Montana really felt that Cut was suspicious and maybe even outright hostile. Lawsuits over land use, environmental concerns, and unpaid bills tarnished the group's image even further over time. And as her illness progressed, Elizabeth did withdraw from public life, and she retreated to her own private home where she could be alone with her loved ones. And for the first time in decades, Cut no longer had a visible, commanding leader. Maybe the most important part of all of this is the lives of the people who were inside of it and who were affected by it. Former members began speaking out after all of this, and some described the heartbreak of losing years of their lives to a prophecy that never came true, and others spoke about growing up in fear, never being able to really feel safe, and never being able to really trust the outside world.
And for the last 2 weeks, they've been on trial in Boise, Idaho, for their involvement in the kidnapping case of church member Laverne Collins Macchio in 1991. They were hired by Macchio's mother to deprogram her.
They were involved in the planning and carrying out of the abduction of Mrs. Laverne Collins Macchio, dealing with the family and holding Mrs. Macchio for approximately 6 days in a local motel.
I had informed the family that I would only come in if he was willing to speak with me, and that's when they called me.
She was ripped out of her house wearing her nightgown in front of her 4 screaming kids. She kicked and screamed to the van where they threw her in, and then took her off to parts unknown.
The prosecution denies the church practices any form of mind control, and that Laverne Collins Macchio was there on her own free will. Alice Chronologer is convinced that she was under mind control. Her parents were so concerned about her total devotion to the church that they hired a deprogrammer.
I was so totalistic in everything they taught me. I was taking it in as valid and true. And for the first time in a long time, this man got me to question the validity of the information that I was believing, and it set me free.
Many people struggled with shame, and many people were upset with themselves for how they could have believed in the doomsday prophecies so deeply. How could they have uprooted their families? How could they have given away all of their money? How could they have followed a woman who ultimately led them nowhere? Here's where I do want to say that it's easy as an outsider to laugh at people who believe in these types of things, but once again, this is not something that means that you are unintelligent or that you are easily manipulated or something like that. Cults have these tactics for a reason, and it's because it works, and really everybody could be the victim of a cult or cult ideology. And the truth is, people long for connection, they long for meaning, and this was a way for a lot of them to feel that way. And cults prey on those things. They don't prey on people being stupid, they prey on people who have hope and want to be better and want to do more.
We are a wonderful example of trying to make a new age religion work.
As things moved on to the 2000s, the influence shrank even more dramatically. There really wasn't much lingering or hanging on, and the ranch in Montana did stay there, but it became much less of a fortress for an apocalypse and just kind of now functions as a retreat center for people who are still around and faithful to what Elizabeth's teachings were. New leaders did try to present CUT as a respectful spiritual organization, emphasizing the Ascended Masters and the Violet Flame while downplaying the failed prophecies, but the energy backing the organization was gone and there wasn't really a new figurehead to take the place. Elizabeth's magnetism couldn't be replicated.
Send forth the call, restore the faith, herald the new birth, God is come again.
Which means that these followers scattered communities, they went to online groups. In 2009, Elizabeth herself did pass away, and then CUT was really just a shadow of its former self. But the story doesn't end with CUT's decline, because for those who lived through it, the impact does remain, and the trauma of failed prophecies doesn't fade easily.
Ex-members describe living a life where their every move is controlled.
We were shocked to see how little we were actually thinking for ourselves. Everything was being dictated to us. What we're going to wear, when we're going to sleep, when we're going to get up, what we're going to do for our work, what kind of sex we can have, how many times a week we can have it.
The scars of financial losses don't disappear, and the scars of a childhood spent underground and preparing to live underground still ache. For survivors, healing has been a long process, and they have said that therapy has helped, support groups, and conversations with other ex-members have been really, monumental for them. And I think that that is the real legacy of the Church United and Triumphant. It's not just a failed prophecy in Montana, but it did reshape the lives and sometimes shattered the lives of its members.
But Joseph Zimhart, Kenneth Paolini, and Mary Alice Kronenlager, all former members of the church, believe comparisons to the Branch Davidians are justified.
The inner core, the permanent staff of Church Universal and Triumphant would be closer in terms of their orientation to the group as the Branch Davidians were to David Koresh. Those are the people that listen to everything that Elizabeth Clare Prophet hands down and will obey her to do just about anything, I think.
All three are now deprogrammers.
All right, you guys, let me know what you think about the Church Universal and Triumphant. This was a cult that I had not heard of before I started making this video and started looking out for cults to do this video on. I thought that it would be a little bit more interesting because something that has been hard is finding footage of cults, but there was a lot of footage of this online and I have not really ever heard anyone talking about it. If you've ever had experience with this group or with this church, or if you know if there's any active groups out there right now, definitely let me know. I did hear that there is an active group in Minnesota, which is how I stumbled upon this, but throughout my research, this is all based in, Montana and all of that. So if you know of one in Minnesota, I would love to hear about that because that's where I'm from and I specifically have an interest in cults in Minnesota. If you made it this far and you want to support me, please like my video, please subscribe or double check to make sure that you are subscribed if you're not already. You can always become a member to my channel. You get access to videos early or videos that other people wouldn't normally get, priority comment responses and things like that. If you guys do want to support me, that is probably the best way to do it. It does help a lot. You can always hit share and copy link. You don't have to send it to anyone, I promise, but it helps way more than you think that it does. And yeah, I really, really appreciate you guys watching. I know that it's been a really heavy week the last week, so I hope that you are taking care of yourselves no matter what you believe or where you stand. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one.
I hate you, 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 I hate you. You're not a rapper. I am a rapper. I am a rapper. I am a rapper. I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you.